So the first thing I'll ask all of you is coming back to the title of the whole event, which is defining smart networks to maximise quality of experience for OTT applications. I suppose the question is that something that has to be done, or what is it that OMA should be doing to try to sort of meet that objective? Shall I start with you, Han? With you.
Yeah, well, actually, I just more or less said it, I think, right? I think the APIs are key. That's really, really important. Yeah. I was listening to both Bob and Camillo, and it's actually much more fun if speakers disagree. But unfortunately, I totally agree with the observation that, what you really need to do is, rather than compete with OTT players, open up to them. And that's where APIs definitely come in. So I think that's, for me, APIs is the key word here. So.
Oh.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think the whole point of APIs is that you are opening up the underlying value that the network has. But value always has to be determined in dollars and cents. It's not an abstract concept to OTT players. Value means that whatever service you're opening up, they can make more money with their thing. And if you look at the world as, how does the OTT players make more money by me opening up certain services, then I think you can find the right things to be doing. And that, in my mind, is what should be considered a smart network.
So we've got APIs, we've got partnerships. Camillo?
Yes, I tend to agree. Open API are important, and OMA worked on this a lot, but first of all, we have to identify which is the value to be offered, because the definition of the API is related to how to offer this value, but which is the value is still unclear in some part. For example, we could be happy that we have a standard open API for SMS, but this cannot perceived as a value for OTT because SMS is no more used. So first of all, we have to concentrate on new capabilities offered from the network. For example, in the domain, just to provide a different example from the presentation, the domain of access to content, we can offer new way of hosting content closer to the user, for example, in the access network. As some vendors are starting to do this smart cell to have local caching of content, and so to bring the cloud closer to the user. And something like this. We need a new generation of capabilities to offer, and then define new APIs.
Okay, thanks. So I'll ask a couple of the questions that have come in online, and then I'll invite some questions from the audience here. So in a world where the retail price of a mobile application is between €3 and €1, is there a way for the operator to monetize the investment they would have to make to open up the network APIs to the OTTs? Anyone want to say that? Go on, Camillo.
We're going to try. I mean, the potential business model can foresee different entities repaying these capabilities, and the cost being distributed between OTT and the user. There can be a willingness to sustain this cost only if we will able to demonstrate that we can increase the quality of the final application. This is the purpose.
Well, obviously I'm not an operator, so I'm not in the position to give business advice. But if we look at the example I gave in FedEx, it's very clear that they can offer different levels of service to the end user depending on the needs. And there are certain over-the-top apps that might have grades of service depending on what the end user needs. There's always lots of ways of bundling and monetizing services that can lead to, to better revenue streams. And for example, you could have quality of service differentiations for different kinds of video conferencing. Like, it might not be that important to have a high level of video conferencing quality between two end users peer-to-peer. It might be more important if it's a business meeting to have better quality of service, so then you might opt for that, and then that gives you an opportunity, depending on the types of SLAs you commit to make more money with the same kind of over-the-top service.
Okay, thanks, Will. Kenny, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, a question. Kenny Kwali, TNT. How do the OTT players find out about these network or operator offered APIs? What would be the best strategy to kind of promote that? Should it be television ads, or just develop the alliance like the old Intel Inside type of approach?
So there's an issue there which I suppose relates to who the customer is, and are you talking about developer communities and things like that? So operator developer communities versus other communities, is that where you're heading?
Well, just basically, how do if you're a designer of an app which gets to be very popular, how do you find out about all these apps, APIs?
Okay. How?
I guess there's a technical and a non-technical answer to that. The technical answer is, of course, you do have, most API suites have discovery, some sort of discovery mechanism, right? But I have a hunch that's not what you're actually getting at. And I think what you meant is more, how do we partner up? But actually there maybe the answer is the Open Mobile Alliance. That's maybe why we're here, right? I see a role for this organization here. To build that ecosystem.
So we're going to hear a little bit more from some of the other players in the API market who have their own developer communities and the relationships with a lot of developers. So that might be an interesting topic to bring up at that stage. Any other questions from the floor? Oh, question? Thank you.
Hello. I'm Mike Lucien with Applied Communication Sciences. The statement was made that APIs open up value. And my question is, what value does standardization offer, and who benefits from this value?
Well, actually, I would add to that question. I'm not going to answer it. I'm actually going to add to that, because I was going to make the same remark earlier. It's just to add a little bit of maybe some dissent to the. It's always interesting if you have some dissent as well. So. Of course, engaging with over-the-top players and not seeing them as a competition anymore, but rather engaging with them. That's of course a nice story. But what I see in the market today is that a lot of the bigger over-the-top players play a winner-takes-all game, right? So the big, and I think that ties in with your question. And, are they going to want to be engaged? Are they just going to ignore standards and opening up and all that stuff and say, we'll just do it all by ourselves?
Bob?
Yeah, there are a couple questions there. First of all, what are standards? The fact that OMA or other organizations generate specifications doesn't mean they're generating standards. A spec doesn't become a standard until it's actually adopted by a large number of people or companies. So part of the problem is, if you look at over-the-top apps, they are infrastructure independent, and the expectation is that it'll work independent of the mobile operator community. So if we want to open up APIs for underlying value, we have to make sure two things. One is that they're marketed directly to the developers who would be building these apps, or the over-the-top players. And two, that a large portion of the mobile internet community, which is composed of mobile operators, has actually implemented these APIs and opened up the same value across the networks. Otherwise, it's too fragmented and will not look like a benefit to the over-the-top players.
So has the community done a particularly good job at the moment in promoting those APIs. So I suppose there are some examples if you look at RCS with GSMA promoting RCS and one API. That's one aspect with Join and other initiatives. But in terms of the other APIs, and we've heard about some of them, how well do you think to date carriers and the members of OMA have managed that? Well, I'll be provocative.
My personal opinion is not too well. And even GSM Association, if you look at the Join stuff, it seems, my opinion is that it's still very fragmented and ill-defined and not well adopted yet. So if they are proactively marketing, the diffusion rate into the operator community seems to be pretty poor. So if you just look at the result, I would have to say that it's not doing a good job. Now, whether those are the right APIs, whether they increase the value of over-the-top player applications or not, I don't know if that's really been looked at too well. So I guess my overall opinion is no, not doing a good enough job.
Okay. So the least
I think it's actually also simple. You cannot publicize something you don't have. I mean, there's APIs. A lot of the APIs we have today is paper. I think one of the big problems is that operators haven't made the step to actually implement them on a sort of larger scale yet. So, yeah, if you don't really have them, if it's just talk, then it doesn't get beyond that. So, I think that step still has to be taken.
Let's say, in general, in my opinion, it's likely that if we will have this kind of cooperation between OTT and operator, will be initially driven by big agreement between big players. I mean, as a sort of dedicated network for some big over-the-top player. And for example, standard enabler as they are really forward-looking. To engage the long tail of developers will take some time. And if something will happen, my opinion will start from a big commercial agreement, not from the long tail.
Okay. So I'll ask a question from the internet again. So I think this follows on from Bob's presentation. What is preventing the mobile ecosystem from adopting an OTT business model like the cable operators or FedEx? And what can stimulate it if it's not happening already?
Well, that's certainly a good question. I mean, because there are different operators are doing different things. Some have adopted some things, some haven't. I think if you look at the history of the mobile operators, where the industry came from, the primary barrier is fear. And after going from a closed kind of walled garden environment to opening up and basically the walled garden not going away, just kind of losing the keys to the walled garden, there's a fear that there'll be continuing loss of revenue to over-the-top players. Therefore, we should look at them as competitors and not as partners. And once you get comfortable with your fears, it's hard to transcend those fears and look at something else.
So it's looking positive from the point of view of potential there, the opportunity is there, but it's not necessarily happening. Right. Sorry, were you going to say something, Hannah? No. Okay. So another question. We think of OTT as an application that runs on top of the operator network in some real-time fashion. Does the cloud architecture potentially change the way that OTT applications will work in the future?
I'm not sure I understand that question, actually.
Does the cloud architecture potentially change the way OTT applications will work in the future? No?
Let's say we have to change something also from a technical point of view in the architecture, as the question is suggesting, because if the application remain infrastructure independent, there is no way to engage the OTT. So when we think to offer new value, this can also be a topological change in the architecture. For example, to have the media in the mobile access network, not in the server in the cloud, to have some capability exposed directly by device and so on. I believe that there is a relationship with the underlying architecture. This business model rely on some changes in the architecture, but we have to show that these are profitable really.
Okay. Any other questions from the floor at all? Otherwise I'll carry on with some of the ones from the internet. There's lots coming in from the internet. Where is it? Camillo proposes recoupling the application layer and the network. Who has to take the next step forward? Oh, lost the question. Who has to take the next step forward? Camillo.
The first step could be to demonstrate that this approach is beneficial with some internal application of the operator. Say in some way we are also service provider. For example, I mentioned this content platform of Telecom Italia for delivering real-time football match stream and so on. So we have to measure the result, I believe, with some of our application, and then we will be ready to open to third parties.
I think it's a good question, because if you have a good business, there's always a tendency for complacency, right? And that's what the operators have been accused of until now. That they were complacent with their old business models. But actually, you can see the same thing happening now with the OTT players. There's also certain complacency, and we're now the big guys, Google and Facebook and whatever. And they will have to make a step as well. There's one very interesting thought I heard. It was actually an article I read, but I don't remember where it was. And that I found it really interesting, where they said, don't forget that apps don't only depend on network connectivity. They actually also depend on smartphones. I mean, everybody has a smartphone now. And we take that for granted, the fact that everybody has a smartphone. But don't forget that in many countries, probably including the US and certainly in Spain, smartphones are popular because they are subsidized by the mobile operator. And they're subsidized because the mobile operator could afford to subsidize them. Now, when mobile operators get in trouble because there's nothing more in the game for them, and they don't subsidize the smartphones anymore, well, that article was actually arguing that very few people are going to pay 500 and something bucks for a smartphone, which is the real price of some of these things. So, and then the whole thing collapses, of course. And I found it a very, very interesting argument.
But do you think those devices are going to stay at that price? So if you look at, especially things like developing markets where, Huawei and others are already producing devices, certainly sub-$100 type smartphone devices, which may not be that powerful, but they can, from the point of view of providing OTT services, can certainly do that.
Well, that's the big question, of course. Where's the sweet spot, right? And is this sustainable? But it's not trivial. I think it's not a trivial question. And bottom line is that I think over-the-top players should also be aware not to become too complacent, because they depend on operators to a large degree. So,
for sure. So I just want to get a picture from you as to where you see the market in, say, 2 years' time. So if you're looking 2 years from now in this space, given what you were talking about earlier, each of you, where do you picture the operator playing a role, the existing OTT players playing a role, or if you want to include things like, where does WebRTC or any of these other capabilities fit in? So looking at perhaps 2 years, or if you want to look further forward. So we'll start with you, Camillo.
My expectation is just, I believe in 2 years we won't have these models in place, but the expectation could be to have a total awareness of the problem state and this possible way forward, and the availability of some first successful case studies is my expectation.
Okay. Bob?
Well, given the rate of change, I think 2 years won't be a lot different. I think it's important that, given the nature of OTT applications, meaning that they are infrastructure independent, that there has to be a substantial move by the operators to collaborate to a common set of value that OTT players can benefit from. And so whether this is about identity or fraud protection or something like that, it's got to be a new value. And I think getting any kind of diffusion of common characteristics of these networks across a large swath of operating networks, by definition, will take more than 2 years. So I don't see a big difference, maybe a little improvement. I'm just trying to be realistic. If you look at how long it took to get, for instance, bilateral roaming agreements in place and things like that, it just takes quite a while to move infrastructure because everything works on different time. So, you know, it takes eons to change a civilization. It takes centuries to change people's habits. It takes maybe decades to change companies with infrastructure. It takes 5 minutes to change Wall Street, right? So everybody's on a different time scale, and I think we sometimes get over-optimistic about how fast things can really change given those different time scales. And so it'd be a little step forward, but I don't think it's going to be a big difference.
Well, if I knew the answer, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. So, yeah, to complement a little bit, I agree with what Bob said, but to complement it a little bit, I think we're going to see changes not only on the operator side. It's clear that they have to move because their business is going. But I think the OTTs also have challenges because if you look at well, you mentioned Wall Street. If you look at the revenue from some of these big ones, even some of these big ones, Twitter hasn't made a profit to date. Facebook is just about there. Maybe only Google is making some profit at the moment. But even that, you know, that comes and goes with how much revenue they get from advertisement. So I think they have challenges too. So we might actually see changes in both. And so it might very well be that a couple of years from now, not only the operators have to move, but the OTTs will actually also have to reach out to the operators to create a more sustainable business model.
Okay, thanks all of you. So before we finish, I'm just going to do a quick poll of the room on a few different things. So just thinking about the last 7 days, how many of you have made a call using your mobile phones? There are some people with their hands down, and I assume that, so is that you haven't made a phone call with your mobile phone in the last 7 days? Okay. How many of you have used a messaging OTT service? WhatsApp, whatever, something like that. Reasonable number? Who's used a voice OTT service? Skype, etc. Okay. Who's made a fixed line call? Okay. I was expecting a lower number actually, I certainly haven't. Who's used a mobile payment service? 1, 2, so pretty low on that one. Who's used NFC in the past 7 days? We have 3 or 4, okay, that's good. How many of you know whether your phones support NFC? Whether it's a yes or a no, whether you know whether your phone does or not.
I know it does.
Okay, good proportion at least know it. How many have downloaded an app? last 7 days? And how many have used a cloud service, either sort of Dropbox or a media, Spotify type service? So a reasonable number. So I think it's interesting to see the sort of balance in terms of.
SMS, yeah. Short message.
Okay, how many have used short message service?
Oh, is it still alive? Still alive.
I was leaving that one, but yes. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for all of you connecting online. We're going to have a 20-minute break now, and we'll be returning at 10:50 local time in 20 minutes. Thank you very much, and thank you to our panel.